Welcome to the National College Podcast, where we dive into the latest education trends, discuss best practice, and highlight important updates in the education sector. I'm your host, Eleanor Adams, and today we're going to be exploring the topic of supporting learning in the most effective ways. With increasing levels of need in our classrooms and in light of the current SEN crisis, this topic is absolutely crucial. I'm really honoured to be joined by Amjad Ali, who is a teacher, SENCo, author and trust leader and trainer. So Amjad, welcome. It's lovely to have you here. Would you like to introduce yourself to us a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. My name's Amjad Ali. I've been a teacher for 19 years. I've been a SENCo for 10 years. And very recently, since January, I'm now a trust, inclusion and SEN lead. I've worked in various young offenders institutes before stepping into the world of teaching, and recently I've written a book too, Little Guide for Teachers about special educational needs.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We've actually been recording today a course on leading teaching assistants, and I know that in your career you've been both a teaching assistant and a teacher for many, many years. So what do you think are the most effective ways for teachers and teaching assistants to work together?
One of the things that we've got to understand is both the TAs and the teachers are extremely busy, and they're busy doing lots and lots of different things. So what we need to establish is, where are the gaps in this busyness? So one of the strategies that you could use between a teacher and a TA is simply making sure that there's clarity over when are you in my lesson, are you in my lesson, how often will you be in my lesson. Now, talking as a secondary school teacher, we don't get the gift of having an allocated TA per lesson. You might have a variety of TAs that come to a variety of different subjects. So coordinating the communication is really, really important. One of the gaps that lots of schools have with this is TA's time structures are very different to teachers' time structures. So do I, as a leader, facilitate the ability to have that conversation? So do I allow for maybe during assembly time for the TA to go and speak to a teacher? Do I coordinate during an inset time, an actual slot for teachers and TAs to plan and coordinate together? So there's lots of different things that you could do, but ultimately leadership team need to create a structure where the TAs can communicate more with the teacher.
Yeah, and I think even in primary schools that is also a similar issue, and it was the same in my case that I had one teaching assistant that was assigned to my classroom, but still we were teaching lessons all day long. And if she started at 9 at the same time that the children were coming in, it was so difficult to find that time where I could share that planning or share what I wanted her to be doing with the children in the class. I know in the course that we've just recorded, giving you a kind of a sneaky peek into some of the content, we talked about rotating roles between teachers and teaching assistants. Could you talk about that in a little bit more detail?
Of course. So one of the things that we often find with teaching assistants and TAs, a teacher often expects the TA to be the expert with our special educational needs students. Now, as a SENCo, I understand the SENCo to practice, and it will say very clearly that the teacher is responsible for the needs of our SEN children. However, busyness creeps back in. They will argue that the TA has a greater understanding of the student with SEN needs, and I would argue why. Why would that be the case? So rotating roles is a strategy that we might use where teachers and TAs rotate who they're supporting. So they would coordinate and communicate between them. So say, for example, I was a teacher and you were my TA. I would say the first 20 minutes, I want you working with the students that have special educational needs. For the next 20 minutes, I'm going to work with those students. You go and work generally with other students. The last 20 minutes, we'll work out who needs what support and we'll coordinate that. So I don't want a fixed responsibility. I also want to establish that as a teacher, I don't want my students with, say, an EHCP to think, sir's not for me. I'm meant to be for you just as much as I'm meant to be for others. In fact, to the contrary, I often argue to teachers that they should disproportionately help the students with special educational needs, not the other way around.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, because at the end of the day, the teacher is responsible and is likely to have more training and more experience and a qualification for supporting those children. And I like that idea that, some children then have this idea that it's always them with a teaching assistant, or it's always a particular group. So this idea of rotating it and mixing it up so that all children, all pupils in the class know that they can go to whichever adult is in the classroom for support.
Absolutely. And it avoids what is referred to as learned helplessness. So if you were with a TA in my classroom and suddenly Miss Adams isn't here today, unfortunately, my students would say, I can't do any work now because Miss Adams is the only one that helps me with work. Whereas actually, if I say, unfortunately, Miss Adams is poorly today, but guess what? I'm still here. I'll still be able to help you. The learned helplessness is far more dangerous than people understand. If I've always had somebody cut up my food, I will never learn to cut up my food. Yeah. So I need to create systems in which I could support and not just rely on over support from others.
Thank you. And something, again, that you've brought up both in the course that we've just recorded and also the course that we already have on a certificate in the role of the teaching assistant is this contract between a teacher and a TA. And, you know, having a kind of an agreement and sort of objectives and goals set out beforehand. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So let me just ask you, or maybe everyone that's watching or listening, have you ever got yourself into a scenario where you should know the name of somebody? So, for example, my son plays in a little under-7 football team. I go to training every Monday with 6 or 7 dads. I don't know 2 of their names. It's too late for me to ask now. Mm-hmm. On the WhatsApp group, their names are random names, so I can't even figure out what their names are. I've got to the awkward point where I just need to go, sorry, what is actually your name? Now, that's not good enough if you're working in a professional context. So how many times have you had a TA that comes into your classroom and you go, I don't actually know who they are or what their role is or how long they've been at the school? If you work in a large secondary school, that's commonplace. So what I ask schools to take on board is something called a TA-teacher agreement, LSA agreement, whatever. You could call it something less formal, whatever. Essentially, it's just a slip that says, my name is Eleanor Adams. I'm coming into your class on Mondays, period 1, Tuesdays, period 2, and Fridays, period 3, week A, and then whatever the week B is if you've got a 2-week timetable. That makes sure that it enables me to know that I've got Miss Adams on a Monday, period 1. So when I'm doing some writing task, I'll ensure that I've rotated the roles between Miss Adams and myself. On a Tuesday, I might say that you can do a little bit of reading with these students and I'll do a little bit of reading with those students. And then a Friday, I can use the extra support for any group work, etc. I will also know when I teach them on a Thursday, I don't have Miss Adams, so I need to design tasks that don't require any further one-to-one work. Now, don't get me wrong, I'll get a slip and I'll say, Miss, you didn't turn up Tuesday period 2. Oh, I'm really sorry. I had to cover a lesson, etc. But I'd rather the teacher have planned for my arrival than not planned at all. So the teacher-TA agreement is to overtake the problem of who are the people that are coming in, when are they coming in, and finally, who are they meant to be helping? Because I can get a class with 13 K codes, so a SEN need, 2 EHCPs, which I should absolutely know who they are, and 4 EAL students, 5 pupil premium students, and maybe a looked after child. I'll go, whoa, way too much for me to do. But if I know that the TA is designated to maybe provide one-to-one support for student X, student Y, I can then help facilitate that support. So a simple slip given at the start of each term to be able to give that will help overtake somebody saying Miss or Sir rather than Mrs. Adams or Miss Adams, for example.
Yeah. And I think it's something that you've said throughout the course today that sometimes these strategies seem to be very simple, but if you haven't got them in place, it's a quick win to put them into place, but it really just helps that operational planning strategy as you're moving forward. So I really like that idea. And something that you've just mentioned there, I think is so important at this moment in time is just that the level of need is increasing. And I think teachers and teaching assistants are feeling overwhelmed with trying to juggle so many different needs that are in the classroom and so many different pupils with very specific needs. It's overwhelming, and we know already that it's an incredibly demanding job. Actually, I wanted to just mention 2 of the webinars that you've done for us previously, which are about overcoming some learning barriers, because I think some of the strategies that you mentioned in those webinars are useful and applicable for all children or all pupils, whether or not they've got particular needs. Could you tell us some of those strategies and some of the things you find useful?
So a phrase that I use often whenever I deliver CPD and I've written in my book is needed for some, but benefiting all. So I don't want teachers to sit here thinking, right, I've got those 7 Ks, 2 EHCPs, 4 EALs. What other stuff do I need to do for them that I don't need to do for my other students? What I'd rather teachers do is say, what do I need to do for these students explicitly, but that will actually benefit everyone? So let me give you a crude analogy. How many times have you walked up to a building where there are steps and immediately next to the steps there is a ramp? So the ramp usually slopes all the way around, outside into some woods, round some toilets, and then back round to the front door, and then the steps give you direct access. Me as an able-bodied person, I could think, I could use those 5 steps to jump up these steps and walk into the building. I could also use that ramp. As somebody that explicitly needs a ramp, they can only use that ramp.
Yeah.
How about we get rid of the steps and just give everyone a single ramp that gets straight into the building? So then what does that look like in a classroom? So when doing reading tasks and when trying to pre-teach difficult vocabulary, I don't need to assume that only my E8CP kids don't know what this word means or don't understand what this grammatical term is or don't understand what this idiom is. Just teach everybody that concept and therefore it applies to everyone. Just to be more generalist in the approach, we need to understand that SEND is not a monolith. The idea of a special educational needs isn't this huge ultimate barrier. So I see and hear a lot of teachers and TAs saying, we have a lot of SEND needs. What is the SEND need you're referring to? But equally, I've never met a non-autistic child or teacher ever turn around and say to me, Mr. Ali, you know what? I don't have autism, so I quite like sensory overload and chaos in your classroom. I've never met a non-dyslexic child or adult ever say to me, Mr. Ali, I don't have dyslexia, so I quite like the illegible, disorganized slides that you have. And finally, I've never met a student without ADHD or an adult that's ever turned around and said to me, Sir, Mr. Ali, I don't have ADHD, so I quite like you talking to me non-stop 60 minutes straight without any movement. So then I consider, why am I thinking I've got to do this for my ADHD or autistic or dyslexic child? And actually, it helps everyone. Everybody can benefit from those. Now, that's not to exclude the individualization and personalization that some students absolutely need.
Yep.
But holistically, I want you to do this rather than this and this. So that's where we need to move to as a profession. The amount of people profiles, educational psychology reports, or E8CPs that say things like chunk and sequence instructions. And I think, wow, did you need to write that on a legal document for me to just do what I should do as a teacher? So we need to move away from these things that are miraculous or groundbreaking, but actually say, what is it that is good teaching that will really help everyone? And let's just ensure we're doing that, rather than that idea of I need to do this and this and this and this extra. So in those webinars that you refer to, we talk about writing and time management and reading and decoding. So there are lots of generalist strategies that we can use to help that are needed for some but benefit all.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's so true. Really, really good ideas. And I just wanted to ask if you've got any sort of final top tips for the teachers and teaching assistants that are listening to us about how do we make that learning really effective in the classroom?
One word I would say is success. If you want students to want to learn in your lesson, then show them what success looks like. If you're successful, you yearn for more success. You crave more success because success brings praise. Everybody loves praise. They might not love it publicly. They might not love it in everybody's face, but they love a well done, excellent, good. So if I could get a student being successful, I get them wanting to taste more success and therefore wanting to learn more in order to taste success. Where does the opposite happen? I don't want to learn in your lesson, Mr. Ali, because every lesson I have with you, Mr. Ali, I don't learn. I therefore see no success and therefore I see no point. So my simple tip would be, question for you all to reflect on. At what opportunity is there for success for your children? Do they have to wait 40 minutes, 25 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 minute? When do they first taste success? For me, it might be as soon as they've come in through the door, I say, well done, you sat down, you got the title down, bag off, book out, bam, we're ready, good, well done. So straight away, they're like, well, I'm doing this good, I'm already here. Okay, let's start with our recall check. Excellent, you got 3 out of 5 right. Why did you get the other 2 wrong? Correct your answers. Good, I've already started the lesson. I've got 3 right. I'm okay. What's the opposite, Eleanor? Come in. Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? You're late. This is wrong. You haven't done this. Hurry up, do this. No success straight away. You got 5 out of 5 wrong. Why'd you get 5 out of 5 wrong? You shouldn't be getting them wrong. No success. Let's start this task. I couldn't do the last task. How am I going to do this task? Then you see the cycle repeating and repeating and repeating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes as teachers, we also need to train ourselves to notice the positive And it's very easy sometimes to notice the negative. Somebody comes in, their uniform's not right, or they don't have their equipment, or, they're not kind of focused straight away. And you immediately, your eye is drawn to those situations. And
we use the phrase all the time. I've got eyes in the back of my head. Whereas I say, catch them being good. Why are you trying to catch them doing bad stuff all the time? Just catch them being good. You know what? I noticed that. Well done.
Yeah.
Rather than I saw you trying to think about something and just like, of course, you got to sweat the small stuff. But let's go with success and praise rather than nitpick and negativity.
Yeah. And I think it immediately transforms that environment in the classroom and changes it into something that's so much more positive. And, we have to acknowledge that students are at school for a long, long day. And what we might find really important at that moment in time, them having their book open, having underlined the title, having written the learning objective, is maybe not necessarily the most important thing for them in that moment. So...
And we have to consider this, right? At our grand ages, you're obviously a lot younger than me. At our ages, right, there's nothing now that we no longer do that we're not good at or we don't like anymore. We just say, I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So if I don't like something or I'm not good at it anymore, guess what I do? I quit.
Yeah.
I just go, nope, not for me anymore. Children don't have that chance.
Yeah.
They don't have that choice. Not that they should have that choice. What I'm saying is, don't make them not good at it. Don't make them not enjoy it. Do the opposite and suddenly they'll go, I like this.
Yeah.
People that say, I love your subject, or I love you, or I love your lessons, I love this. Yeah, they might like you and they might think you're a great person, etc. But fundamentally, it comes down to you make them successful in that subject.
I really like that. That's a great place to end. On the word success, where can we allow the students in our classes to have success and having it, like you say, in that first moment that they're entering the classroom and continuing that throughout the lesson so that it's not something that's unattainable, that only some of the children are achieving maybe right at the very end of the lesson.
60 minutes is a long time.
A long time. Great. Success. Let's get success from the start. I love it. Thank you so much, Amjad. It's been such a joy to talk to you today. So that's all that we have time for today. Thank you so much, Amjad, for joining us and for sharing your wealth of experience of how schools can really ensure that learning is supported in the classroom. And let's all work towards that success. If you found this podcast useful, be sure to check out the National College platform, where you will find all of our other trending podcasts, blogs, webinars and courses, ensuring that you stay up to date with all of the developments in the education sector. Thanks again.